Once upon a time in Baghdad, there was a wise man who spent his whole life trying to grow rich. There are two kinds of rich men, the ones who inherit comfort, and the ones who earn every coin by walking through hell. Sinbad was not rich because he was lucky. He was rich because he survived what should have killed him. Shipwrecks, monsters, slavery, storms, islands that were not islands, and a sea that gave wealth to some men, only after taking everything from them first. Today, when people hear the name Sinbad, they think of fantasy, a sailor, a legend, a tale. But beneath the myth, there is something much more real. Because Sinbad is not just a story about adventure. It is a story about commerce, about uncertainty, about ambition, and about the brutal truth every merchant, investor, and empire learns sooner or later. Fortune belongs to those who survive volatility. This is the story of Sinbad the Sailor. Sinbad began where many fortunes begin, at the edge of the known world. In Basra, one of the great ports of the Islamic world, men did not become rich by sitting still. They became rich by moving goods across distance, by buying low in one land and selling high in another, by understanding routes, timing, scarcity, danger, and demand. The sea was not romantic. The sea was infrastructure. It connected markets. It carried spices, wood, ivory, jewels, textiles, and stories. It made cities rich, and it swallowed fools. Sinbad was young, ambitious, intelligent, restless. He looked at the merchants returning with rare goods and heavy purses, and he wanted more than a quiet life. He wanted fortune. And like many young men who chase wealth, he believed he understood the opportunity before he understood the risk. So he took his capital, joined a voyage, and sailed out into the Indian Ocean. What he thought would be the beginning of prosperity became the beginning of transformation. At first, everything looked like success. The wind was favorable, the ship was strong, the merchants were confident, and the world seemed open. Then came the first illusion. The crew stopped on what looked like an island. Solid ground, safety, rest. But in the world of Sinbad, appearances are expensive. Because the island was not an island. It was a living creature beneath them. And the moment it moved, the illusion collapsed. Men screamed, fire fell, cargo vanished. The ship pulled away. The sea took over. In one instant, commerce became chaos. That is the first lesson hidden inside the Sinbad story. The market does not care what you expected. You can study, you can prepare, you can invest, and still be destroyed by something you did not even know was possible. That is not failure. That is exposure to reality. Sinbad was thrown into the sea, not as a hero, not as a legend, just as a man suddenly discovering that ambition without resilience is worthless. He survived, barely. And when he finally reached land, he was no longer the same man who had left Basra. Because after your first disaster, you stop worshiping opportunity and start respecting uncertainty. Most stories glorify the win. Sinbad teaches something more important. Sometimes the real victory is not profit. It is survival. Cold, hunger, isolation, exhaustion. On paper, he had lost everything, but he was alive. And in systems shaped by risk, staying alive is not the consolation prize. It is the foundation of every future fortune. Eventually, Sinbad reached civilization again. And this is where the story becomes economic in the deepest sense. He did not just escape disaster. He re-entered exchange. He adapted. He traded. He built relationships. He regained position. This is the difference between a dreamer and a merchant. A dreamer thinks wealth is about the big moment. A merchant knows wealth is about what you do after the big shock. Sinbad could. And that is why his story continues. Because each voyage is not just another adventure. It is another cycle of exposure, collapse, adaptation, and return. In other words, Sinbad lives inside the oldest economic pattern on Earth. Risk, loss, adjustment, growth. And he sailed again. That is what makes Sinbad so fascinating. Not that he suffered once, but that he chose to return. Again and again, he entered the machine of trade and risk. He chased routes that promised wealth. He crossed lands filled with rare goods, precious stones, and impossible dangers. Kings, monsters, storms, and greed. Sometimes he gained, sometimes he lost. Sometimes he survived only because he outthought the world trying to kill him. This is why Sinbad matters. His story is a warning. The sea teaches the same lesson again and again. And that makes Sinbad strangely modern. Today we call it entrepreneurship, trade, investment, risk management, resilience. Back then, they called it sailing. So, what is the real economic lesson of Sinbad? It is not take risks. That is too simple. Idiots take risks every day. The real lesson is this: wealth belongs to those who can endure uncertainty longer than others. Sinbad becomes rich not because every voyage works, but because every catastrophe makes him harder to destroy. He learns to read people, to read danger, to recover from loss, to keep moving after ruin, to transform survival into advantage. And every time he returns with something more than gold: experience, judgment, perspective. That is why, in the end, his fortune means something. Because he did not merely acquire wealth, he paid for it. In many versions of the story, a poor and exhausted porter stops in front of the house of the wealthy Sinbad and wonders why some men live in comfort while others carry the weight of the world on their backs. That image matters, because from the outside, wealth always looks simple. You see the mansion, the food, the servants, the peace. You do not see the storms, the hunger, the terror, the nights when death came so close it left a mark. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all in the story of Sinbad. The rich man at the end of the story is not simply lucky. He is compressed experience, accumulated survival. Proof that behind some fortunes there is not comfort, but a long history of risk absorbed and pain endured.